All right, so Cody, thanks for coming on. I appreciate it. I want to start with this. You've been basically at the front of the water fight here in East Texas to protect this valuable resource in our area. Why has this been so personal to you, and as you continue this fight after the special session ended?
Yeah, man, great question. So, as the chair of natural resources in the House, water is my jurisdiction area when we're considering legislation during regular session and then throughout the interim. And so we had gone all session long, considering all sorts of different water policy, some contentious issues, some not. And I wrote House Joint Resolution 7, which is the constitutional amendment now on the ballot as Prop 4. And in that legislation, I built in an exception for the money, for the new water supply funds, saying that they cannot ever be used on fresh groundwater. To access fresh groundwater. And I did that because I knew at some point, someday down the road, the big city urban areas would be coming to East Texas to try to export our groundwater. Little did I know that just days after session ended, it would be announced that this big water project was happening in my backyard, in my home county. And so, the fact that it seemed like they waited until after session when the legislature couldn't take action on this proposed project, that they waited until that point. I don't know whether that's the case or not, but it sure seemed that way. That was a little bit offensive to me. And so, aside from that, this project and what we're dealing with has to do with the rule of capture, saying the biggest straw that someone can put in the ground, they can take as much water as they want out from underneath their neighbors. And unless you have a groundwater conservation district to help protect you and put guide rails around that, then there's nothing you can do. So literally, with a project like this that's pumping this much water, you're looking at a cone of depression 50 to 100 miles wide, stealing the water out from thousands of my constituents. That's where the real offense comes in. That's why I'm fighting so hard to protect the property rights of East Texans.
Yeah, and you've also said, for somebody who hasn't been keeping up with this topic, quote, this is probably one of the largest fights we will ever have here. How long do you, even if Proposition 4 gets passed, I'm guessing this is going to continue to go on, this fight?
Absolutely. So really it goes back to 1904, 1907 when the Texas Supreme Court issued their ruling creating the rule of capture. And ever since then, as technology improved, back then they had windmills that were 30 feet high that were producing the water. Not very much water at all. I don't think that court could have ever contemplated three-phase power with 26-inch casing pipe going down into the ground and wells pumping 24 hours a day, 7 days a week like they are, and then stacked all on top of each other. Just an incredible amount of water being produced out of the ground. And so for generations now, the legislature has avoided tackling the question of rule of capture. And I think that it's time now. We're at the apex of this decades-long discussion that has needed to happen to modernize the rule of capture, in my opinion.
And for that, I want to go over to the regular session before we get to the special session here. We know what happened in that, but what was your mindset going into that, specifically, of course, for East Texas? A lot of other issues were going on in your mind too, but specifically water. What was your mindset there?
So the state of Texas, during regular session, the state of Texas is facing a $154 billion shortfall in water funding across the whole state. We're the 8th largest economy in the world if we were our own country. We have 1,600 people a day moving to the state of Texas. And so if we want to continue to be that hotbed of economic activity and where people want to come live, we've got to be able to provide the water for that. And so that's why I wrote House Joint Resolution 7, now Prop 4, to begin to provide that funding, but also to push new water sources away from groundwater, away from the fresh groundwater in East Texas and towards seawater desalination, brackish groundwater desalination, and then hopefully going and exporting water or importing water from other states to Texas.
And of course, nothing was ultimately passed in a regular session. Walk us through the politics, or just kind of behind the scenes, why nothing was able to get done at that point in time.
House Joint Resolution 7 was passed. That passed through both the House and the Senate, and now is on the ballot in November for the voters to approve and go through the final process there. Are you asking about the project now in Anderson County and Henderson County? Why nothing passed on that?
Yes. My bad.
Yeah, because really it wasn't on anybody's radar that anybody was contemplating coming into East Texas to export groundwater. And, rural areas really like to have local control. They don't want the state telling them what they can or cannot do. So to help support that, the legislature set up groundwater conservation districts as a mechanism to provide controls around accessing groundwater. So, historically and for decades now, that's how we've let local areas decide how their groundwater is accessed and utilized. Now, after session, we have this one entity trying to export over 10 billion gallons of water per year. That's an excessive amount. That's kind of what shocked the whole system and made us start taking a really hard look at this now. That wasn't happening in East Texas before. Now that it is, or it's proposed to happen, I'll be spending a lot of time during the interim with committee hearings focused on addressing that issue.
And I believe you met with the governor on this during at least the special session.
That's right.
Remember seeing that. What has he told you specifically on this? I'm guessing he supports it.
He does, yeah. So when we got to the special session, typically special sessions, the governor has the ability to place the items on the agenda that we can address, that the legislature can address. If he doesn't place it on the agenda, then the legislature can't take action on it. And so what I did is spent my time talking to Governor Abbott, explaining the issue to him. He grew up in Longview, I think, so he's an East Texas native originally. So he gets our arguments with groundwater, but he also understands the bigger picture. And the bigger picture is that the water coming down the Trinity River, that's surface water owned by the state of Texas. Well, this well field at Redtown Ranch in South Anderson County and bleeding over into Houston County, that's in the aquifer recharge zone where that surface water goes and enters the aquifer and recharges the aquifer there. So if you have a well field pumping massive amounts of water out of the ground, what you're going to do is start to deplete the water in the river. Well, that surface water in the Trinity River goes down and supplies the drinking water to the whole Houston region. That's over 25% of the state population. So it's not just a little East Texas issue. That's why the governor understood that. That's why he placed this little local issue on the special session call. I filed House Bill 27 at that point, which would have created a 2-year moratorium on any high capacity exports inside the Natchez and Trinity Valley's groundwater conservation district. That bill passed almost unanimously out of the House. It passed unanimously out of my committee, only 4 votes against it out of the House, and then it ultimately ended up it did pass out of the Senate, but they stripped out the 2-year moratorium in that bill. That was the most important part of the bill to buy us time. And so I refused to agree to the amendments that the Senate put on there, and the bill ended up dying on the last day of session.
When it comes to water in other parts of the state, we know they're struggling as well. What have you heard about that, not just here in East Texas?
Yeah, so right now, Corpus Christi is seeing a massive crisis with water. They're like a couple of months out from completely being out of water. And so there are a couple of desalination plants that are on the table right now. One of them is by the city of Corpus Christi. That one could come online very quickly, but from what I understand, the city council just voted a couple of weeks ago not to move forward with that project. Then there's another desalination plant that they're contemplating from the port of Corpus Christi that's a little further out. It's 4 or 5 years out to when that could be built. That doesn't solve the problem that they're facing right now. So now they're turning to groundwater in other counties adjacent to them. So this whole issue is brewing up in other areas as well. Then you go to the I-35 corridor, which is so high growth, fast growing area, and they don't have the water needed to continue to build new homes and new businesses there. So they're looking for new sources of water. It's happening all over the state.
I want to get to, of course, Proposition 4. You talked about a little bit. If somebody is not aware of Proposition 4, they plan to vote come Tuesday, November 4th. kind of your thinking behind it, and ultimately, what do you think about it?
Yeah, so Proposition 4 creates a new dedicated funding stream for water in Texas. It's called the Texas Water Fund. Over the next 20 years, it's only funded if the state has a revenue surplus. No new taxes from it. This is only through the sales tax collected by the state. And if there is a surplus, then that $1 billion every year would be dedicated to the water fund. That's split in half between the new water supply fund, so water desalination, brackish groundwater desalination, and new sources from other states coming in. And then the other half is to fix our broken and leaking pipes. We're losing billions upon billions of gallons of water through leaking pipes all throughout the state of Texas. As it is. So that's where the money would be dedicated to. And why it is so important in this fight that we're having over our groundwater in East Texas is because the areas that need it are looking for the cheapest and easiest way to get water. And right now, that's drilling wells in fresh groundwater. Well, this new fund helps push the market away from East Texas groundwater and towards water desalination along the coast or brackish groundwater desalination. And the state of Texas is sitting on literal oceans of salty groundwater that we can't use right now unless we have desalination plants.
What have you heard from people in your district, people you represent on this? Have you talked to anybody? What are their opinions on it right now?
Yeah, there's mixed emotion right now. You know, everybody's pretty scared, pretty fearful of anything related to water, right? We're in a protective mode right now, which I totally understand. But the reality is that if we don't pass Proposition 4, then the big cities are guaranteed to come take our water. There won't be much that we can do to stop them from taking our water. That's why it's so important to pass Prop 4.
If this doesn't pass, what would be next?
The next step would be to go back to session and pass another bill and come to the voters again, hopefully try again. And then I will continue to fight, no matter what, continue to fight the theft of our groundwater in East Texas, but it will be harder to do that if we don't push for new sources of water through seawater desalination and brackish groundwater desalination.
And one of the concerns about the annual funding that will go toward the controversial new water supply projects like oil and gas wastewater reuse and desalination process. I believe you've been talking about that a little bit. But if anybody else has a question on that and they're concerned, what else can you tell us about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So some of the concerns that I've heard are on oversight. Is there transparency and oversight, or are we just writing a blank check for a state agency to hand out? So first off, the Texas Water Development Board is the state agency responsible for overseeing the distribution of those funds. So for years now, they've already been going through this. So the legislature will appropriate a certain amount of money every 2 years for the Water Development Board to issue for new water projects. And they've had a phenomenal track record with that. So that's the state agency that will oversee it. On top of that, for transparency and accountability, the legislature has authority and regular oversight over the Water Development Board. But then we have another layer of accountability, and that's through what we've created in the Texas, the Water Fund Advisory Committee, and that's a joint committee between the House and the Senate. I'm the chair of this committee on the House side. Senator Perry is the chair on the Senate side, and we come together during the interim to review everything that the Water Development Board is doing. How are they spending the money? Where are they spending the money? To make sure that we have eyes on this. And then additionally, just because we're creating this funding stream of $20 billion doesn't mean that it automatically goes. So every session, the legislature, if there is a surplus and this money is qualified, then the legislature has to approve and appropriate that money to be spent.
You were talking about that a little bit. The concerns of transparency and accountability, like you just touched on about the Texas Water Development Board. What else could you guys do to maybe ease some concerns about that?
I don't know what else. I think it's important for people to understand what's actually in the law as written. There's some misunderstanding that there's not any transparency or accountability. And the reality is we've got multiple layers of that built into both House Joint Resolution 7 and then the enabling legislation which passed and was signed by the governor, which is SB 7. So from the legislative process, all of the meetings are open meetings. The public is welcome to watch, to come be part of that as we have them throughout the year. And so it's really one of the most transparent and accountable things that we've proposed so far. The only other thing that is similar to this is the way that our highways and TxDOT is funded. It's funded through a very similar mechanism of dedicated constitutional funding. And so I would argue that this water fund has even more transparency and accountability than even the highway funding does.
Up until Tuesday, November 4th, Election Day, is there anything else you're doing to try to get the word out?
Yeah, a lot of meetings, phone calls, workshops that I've put on in the district. I've come here to Tyler for a different event to talk about this same issue, and just trying to make sure people are educated and understand the facts behind what's in the bill and how this will be treated once it's passed.
Yeah, and the Neches and Trinity Valley's Groundwater Conservation District voting recently to spend those 40 permit applications for the high-capacity water wells in Anderson County. How do you feel about that? And is there an update on that? I know that was, I think, 8 or 9 days ago, if I'm not mistaken.
That's right. So last week, I believe it was last Thursday or Friday, there was a lawsuit from Sanderson Farms against the Groundwater Conservation District, trying to halt the issuance of these permits. And so they reached a settlement, and the judge issued an order saying that the decisions that the board made back in June, which was administrative completeness on the applications and then electing to go to the State Office of Administrative Hearings, or SOA, that those votes that they took are null and void. So starting completely over at ground one, or square one. On top of that, and more importantly, the court said that the Groundwater Conservation District cannot take any action on high capacity production, which is over 3,000 acre feet per year, I believe, until 3 studies have been completed and have been received and reviewed by the GCD board. And so those 3 studies are from the Trinity River Authority, the Groundwater Conservation District itself, who will hire a hydrogeologist to do a study, and then the third one would be from the Water Development Board.
Before people head to the polls November 4th, Tuesday, what would be your message if they aren't really paying attention too much about Proposition 4? They see it on the ballot, they don't know much about it, they see this interview. What can you say what maybe you haven't said already during this interview?
If you care about protecting East Texas groundwater in this fight that we've been having, then passing Proposition 4, voting for Proposition 4 is a critical piece to making sure that we can protect our water for generations to come.
Is there anything else you're hearing on the water topic, maybe not just about Proposition 4 in your district and as people around East Texas right now?
That's pretty much it. I mean, that's focusing on the fight that we're having with this conservation equity management, the high capacity exports. You know, I've been in the legislature now for almost 8 years, and without question, this topic has reached fever pitch among all of my constituents. This is what everybody cares about. That's what I'm focusing every ounce of my energy and effort into, to make sure that we stop this from happening.
He talked about it a little bit in the beginning of the interview, but I want to paint 2 futures for Texas here in this question. One if we take care of our water, and one if we don't. What is East Texas going to look like in the next 10 to 20 years, 40, 50 years down the road if, you know, Proposition 4 doesn't get passed and if other stuff doesn't work out down the road?
Yeah, I'm scared to think of what that reality would look like, because let's take just this particular project, for instance, and look at what would happen if it went through. So the amount of water that Anderson and Henderson counties are allowed to produce every year right now, based on the modeled available groundwater, is 36,000 acre feet per year. That's for every well that exists out there right now, and all of the new industries that might need to put a well in that might come in to those 2 counties. The proposed wells that have been applied for, that have been the center of controversy. What they're wanting to take is over 50,000 acre feet per year of groundwater. So well over what is sustainable to produce out of this aquifer. If that happens, that means that there's no access to water for any new industry coming in, no new jobs. Wells go dry because we're over pumping the aquifer that exists now. So all of our industry and jobs dry up. That really means that our towns and our communities and the heart and soul of East Texas dries up and goes away if we don't protect our groundwater.
So what you're saying, basically a big time impact on our East Texas economy.
Massive.
Final question, anything else you can tell us, Proposition 4, anything else coming up, what you plan to do, the fight to protect our East Texas water?
Yeah, so coming up in the next few months, I'll start having interim hearings at the Capitol and hopefully throughout Texas, having field hearings. Come here to East Texas to have constituents and the people of Texas come tell us what their thoughts are on the rule of capture. How do we need to modernize it? What else can we do to provide the resources necessary for our rural water supply systems beyond just Proposition 4. So look forward to having those conversations with the people of East Texas as we move forward and head into the next legislative session.
Cody, thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate you coming here.
My pleasure.